At their peak, American malls were much more than just collections of stores under a single roof. They were the heartbeat of suburban life. If you grew up in that era, you know exactly what that feels like. It was the default setting for almost everything, where you went for that awkward first date at the movies, where teenagers spent every Saturday afternoon just wandering around to kill time, and where the heavy, buttery scent of Auntie Anne's pretzels practically slapped you in the face the moment you stepped through the glass doors. It wasn't just retail, it was a self-contained culture with its own rules, its own food, and its own energy. But the world shifted, and that energy has largely evaporated. The for-lease signs that used to be a rarity are now the most common sight in the wings of these massive buildings. One by one, these once unstoppable giants are going dark, leaving behind millions of square feet of empty tile and quiet food courts. Today, we're looking at the 5 most iconic American malls that are currently standing on the edge of the cliff. We aren't just talking about a few empty storefronts, we're talking about massive financial collapses, foreclosures, and the kind of debt that no amount of Cinnabon sales can fix. So, as the lights start to flicker, we have to ask, which one of these retail titans is actually going to die first? If you're looking for the ultimate monument to American ambition and the crushing weight of its aftermath, look no further than Syracuse, New York. Welcome to Destiny, USA. The name itself feels like a bit of a cosmic joke now, doesn't it? It's the kind of branding that promised a shiny, neon-lit future, only to deliver a masterclass in how to lose 90% of your value while the world watches. But before you start feeling too bad for the concrete ghost on the shore of Onondaga Lake, remember that this place was once the undisputed king. Long before the coming soon signs became permanent fixtures, this site hosted the legendary Carousel amusement park. In 1990, it evolved into the Palisades Center, and by 2012, after a massive expansion, it became the largest mall in New York State. At its peak, you and 17 million other people visited every year. It was a retail colossus. In 2014, it was valued at a cool $710 million. The owners, Pyramid Management Group, did what any red-blooded American developer would do. They borrowed $430 million against it. And honestly, that's just good business, as long as people keep showing up for their Apple upgrades and Cheesecake Factory dinners. Then, the math stopped working. The loans came due in 2019, and suddenly, the destiny felt more like a dead end. The refinancing failed. The pandemic turned foot traffic into a memory. Pyramid begged for extensions, watching the debt balloon to $453 million while the corridors began to hollow out. You've seen this movie before, but the cast list of departures is particularly brutal. First, the anchors gave up. JCPenney and Lord & Taylor packed their bags. Then came the retail staples. Best Buy, Nordstrom Rack, and Hugo Boss decided the vibes were off. Even the places where you'd go to drown your sorrows after a long day of shopping, like Margaritaville, TGI Fridays, and World of Beer, realized there wasn't enough beer in the world to fix this balance sheet. In the summer of 2024, the facade finally cracked. Pyramid couldn't scrape together a $38.9 million payment to buy one more year of survival. The CEO put out a statement full of corporate optimism, the kind that makes you want to check your own wallet, insisting they were providing an exceptional experience. The reality? Kroll Bond Rating Agency took one look at the books and estimated the liquidation value at $65.3 million. Let that sink in for a second. In just 10 years, a property worth nearly $750 million was reduced to the price of a few luxury condos in Manhattan. It still owes $430 million. That isn't just a down market, it's an economic demolition. If you're looking for the grandparent of the American shopping experience, you'll find it, or what's left of it, just outside Buffalo. Welcome to Boulevard Mall in Amherst, New York. This place didn't just join the mall trend, it helped invent it. Opening its doors in 1962, Boulevard Mall was around before the mall was even a cultural phenomenon. It was there before the neon ADS, before teenage rebellion involved loitering near a Hot Topic, and long before you could order a new life with one click on Amazon. For over 60 years, it stood as a concrete promise of permanence in a world that was rapidly changing. But as you've probably guessed by now, permanent is a dangerous word in retail. For decades, the Boulevard was the titan of Western New York. It was the kind of place where you'd grab a new suit at Sears, a holiday dress at Macy's, and then inevitably lose an hour of your life in the food court. It survived the industrial decline of Buffalo and the economic shifts of the 90s, outlasting almost all of its 1960s peers through sheer stubbornness and community nostalgia. But even the deepest roots can't save you when the soil turns sour. The decline didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing leak. First, the giants fell. When Sears and Macy's checked out, they didn't just leave empty storefronts, hollowed-out anchors act like a vacuum, sucking the life out of every smaller shop nearby. Suddenly, the math for a Gap or a Bath & Body Works stops making sense when the foot traffic vanishes. While the Boulevard was busy being a 1,962 relic, the rest of the world moved on. Walmart and Target offered convenience, outlet malls offered deeper discounts, and a little thing called the internet offered, well, everything. You'd think a city seeing growth in tech and healthcare like Buffalo would be a goldmine. But here's the irony. The Boulevard Mall never figured out how to talk to that new economy. It kept trying to be a traditional enclosed mall in a world that had moved outdoors or online. It was like trying to run Netflix on a VCR. By 2025, the Boulevard isn't just struggling, it's essentially a museum of what used to be. The Saturday afternoon crowds have been replaced by a silence so heavy you can almost hear the property tax reassessments ticking. The for lease signs are less an invitation and more of a warning. Let's talk about Circle Center Mall in Indianapolis, because if you've ever believed in the promise of a shiny new downtown revival, this one feels almost too on the nose. Back in 1995, Circle Center didn't just open, it arrived with purpose. This wasn't another cookie-cutter mall dropped off a highway exit next to a Walmart or a Target. No, this was a statement, a carefully orchestrated collaboration between city officials and private developers, all betting big that downtown Indianapolis could be more than just a place you drove through on your way somewhere else. And for a while, it worked beautifully. At its peak in the mid-2000s, Circle Center was pulling in over $400 per square foot. That's not just good, that's the kind of number that makes retail executives at Macy's nod approvingly and maybe even a little nervously. The mall buzzed with energy. Stores like Nordstrom set up shop, local restaurants thrived, and downtown Indianapolis felt, dare we say it, alive. For a Midwestern city often overlooked in favor of coastal giants, this was proof that urban retail could actually work. And then, well, you know how this story goes. One by one, the anchors slipped away. Nordstrom, which had been there since day one, quietly exited in 2011, chasing newer, shinier opportunities. Other anchors followed the same script rebrand. Hold on, close anyway. Without those big names pulling people in, foot traffic started thinning out. And once that happens, the math gets ugly fast. Sales dropped, tenants left. The energy that once felt so effortless started to feel forced. By the time the pandemic rolled around, the mall's performance had fallen to less than half of its glory days. And suddenly, maintaining nearly 730,000 square feet of retail space didn't feel like a bold urban vision anymore. It felt like a very expensive question mark. Then came 2024, and with it, a number that says more than any dramatic headline ever could, $85 million. That's what Hendricks Commercial Properties paid for the entire mall. Not exactly a ringing endorsement of its future as a shopping destination. Let's be honest, you don't spend that kind of money on a mall because you love malls. You spend it because you see something else entirely. And that something else is a $600 million plan to turn the whole thing inside out literally. The enclosed mall is being reimagined as an open-air, mixed-use campus, complete with apartments, offices, restaurants, and public spaces. Think less food court under fluorescent lights and more weekend brunch that somehow turns into a real estate tour. Even the city is on board, putting up $64 million in support. When a city starts funding the transformation of its own flagship mall into something that isn't a mall, that's not a pivot, that's a full stop. Now let's shift to San Francisco, because if you're expecting a slow, suburban-style mall decline, this one plays out a little differently. Think less gradual fade and more, wait, how did that just happen? Westfield San Francisco Center once stood at 865 Market Street like it had everything figured out, opened in 1988, and then dramatically expanded in 2006. It grew into a 9-story retail giant fused with the historic Emporium building. Not subtle, not modest, more like the retail equivalent of a glass and steel mic drop in the middle of downtown. And for a while, it earned that confidence. At its peak, the mall was generating over $700 per square foot in annual sales. That's the kind of number that makes executives at Apple stores and Nike flagships smile a little wider during earnings calls. This place wasn't just busy, it was elite. Anchored by Nordstrom and Bloomingdale's, filled with high-end dining, and positioned in one of the wealthiest, most dynamic cities in the world, it looked like the future of urban retail done right. The kind of place people pointed to and said, see, malls aren't dead, you just have to do them properly. Right. Then reality, as it tends to do, showed up uninvited. San Francisco's downtown didn't collapse overnight, but it did shift. and fast. Remote work drained the daily flood of office workers who used to wander in for a quick lunch or an impulsive purchase they'd later justify. Foot traffic dropped. Retailers started asking uncomfortable questions, and somewhere in the background, headlines about safety and property crime didn't exactly help convince shoppers to linger. By May 2023, Nordstrom, yes, that Nordstrom, the one occupying nearly 300,000 square feet, decided it had seen enough. When a tenant that size leaves, it's not just a vacancy, it's a structural problem. A third of your retail space doesn't just quietly disappear without consequences. And the response from ownership? Surprisingly blunt. Instead of trying to patch things up or wait for a rebound, Unibail Rodamco Westfield, one of the largest commercial real estate players on the planet, along with Brookfield Properties, simply stopped paying on a $558 million loan and handed the keys back to lenders in June 2023. No dramatic speech, no drawn-out struggle, just, this no longer works. When companies of that scale walk away, it's not panic, it's calculation. A very expensive, very public calculation. To be fair, the mall didn't fail in isolation. San Francisco's broader retail scene has been going through something closer to an identity crisis. Even Whole Foods Market closed a flagship location in the city. Union Square, once one of the most valuable retail corridors in America, started showing gaps where there used to be none. The issue wasn't just this building, it was the environment around it. And that's what makes this story a little more unsettling. This isn't a struggling mall in a fading suburb. This is a 9-story retail complex in one of the richest cities in the world, in a location that, on paper, should support high-end retail indefinitely. If a place like this can't make the numbers work, it raises questions you might not have wanted to ask. City officials and business leaders are talking about solutions, converting offices into housing, rethinking public spaces, trying to bring energy back into downtown. Maybe this building becomes part of that comeback story. Maybe it doesn't. At number 5 is Palisades Center in West Nyack, New York. When it opened in 1998, Palisades Center didn't aim to be just another mall. It went big, actually absurdly big. Over 2.2 million square feet, 4 levels, and packed with enough attractions to make you wonder if you were shopping or accidentally wandering into a theme park sponsored by AMC Theaters and a very ambitious real estate developer. This wasn't a stop by for socks at Gap kind of place. This was a clear your entire Saturday destination. You had the tallest indoor ropes course in the world, an ice rink, bowling, a comedy club, and a massive IMAX theater. People drove in from New Jersey, Manhattan, basically anywhere within a reasonable tolerance for traffic and retail-induced exhaustion, and for a while, it worked. The mall was busy, loud, alive in that slightly chaotic, over-caffeinated way that only places filled with chain stores and food courts can be. Anchors like JCPenney and Lord & Taylor pulled people in, while smaller stores happily fed off the constant flow. It was the classic formula just scaled up to borderline ridiculous proportions. Of course, getting it built wasn't exactly smooth. Local planners and environmental groups fought the project for years, worried about traffic, wetlands, and the small detail of dropping a mega mall into a relatively quiet suburban corner of Rockland County. But eventually, the mall won. It opened, it thrived, and then it started to stop thriving. Because here's the thing about malls, the flashy attractions are nice, but the real engine has always been the anchor stores, the big names, the places people actually plan to visit, and once those start leaving, everything else begins to wobble. First one, anchor closes, then another. Suddenly, those long corridors feel a little longer, a little quieter. JCPenney shuts down, Lord & Taylor follows, and just like that, the gravitational pull weakens. Smaller tenants start doing the math. Some leave, others renegotiate. The dominoes don't fall instantly, but they do fall. It's a pattern so predictable that retail analysts barely bother pretending to be surprised anymore. Then comes the part that's less visible but a lot more final. In February 2023, a foreclosure complaint was filed over a $418.5 million loan after missed payments. By September 2024, a court-appointed receiver stepped in to manage the property, and by the 5th of February 2026, the whole thing was auctioned off for $175 million. Let that sink in for a second. This is a property that was valued at $881 million in 2016. Less than a decade later, it sells for a fraction of that. Not exactly the kind of return you brag about in investor presentations. The original developer, Pyramid, had been juggling financial issues across multiple properties, and Palisades Center became one of the ones they simply couldn't hold on to. It quietly joined a growing list of malls slipping out of their portfolio, less empire expansion, more strategic retreat. And if you think the story ends there, it doesn't, because malls don't exist in isolation. For years, the local community depended on this place, not just for shopping, but for tax revenue. Schools, public services, local budgets, they were all tied, at least in part, to the mall's assessed value. So when that value dropped, the consequences didn't stay inside the mall walls. Tax reassessments led to refunds. School districts lost expected revenue. The same project that sparked years of debate before construction ended up creating a different kind of problem on the way down. Not exactly the nostalgic dead mall aesthetic you see in moody YouTube videos with echoing footsteps and abandoned food courts. This is the part where things get real. Now, Palisades Center sits in a strange in-between state. The land itself, prime real estate near the New York metro area, still holds value. Serious value, which means developers are still interested. But the mall, as a traditional indoor retail space, that version is already over. Maybe it becomes housing, maybe a mixed-use development. Maybe something that tries to blend entertainment, retail, and living space in a way that feels a little more 2026. But what it won't be is what it once was. The ropes course, the ice rink, the endless loops around 4 levels of controlled chaos, they had their moment. A pretty impressive one, actually, just not a permanent one. And the foreclosure? That wasn't the cause. It was just the official confirmation that the story had already ended. One of Portland's most iconic shopping malls and community gathering spaces will close to the public on August 8. It marks the end of an era for the Lloyd Center, a once bustling shopping center that has, in recent years, become a haven for community groups and local businesses. The mall and historic indoor ice rink have called Northeast Portland home since the 1960s. The current owner, Portland-based commercial real estate agency Urban Renaissance Group, plans to demolish the Lloyd Center to make way for housing, parks, and businesses. In its heyday, this place was not just a shopping mall, it was a proud crown jewel of the Rust Belt, a cathedral of prosperity, ranked as the 3rd largest in the world. But now, as we move into the spring of 2026, all that remains of that pride is the hollow roar of bulldozers and broken chunks of concrete under the feet of demolition workers. It's hard not to feel a bit of irony when we start looking closely at the real numbers behind the collapse of an empire once considered untouchable. A massive structure spanning over 1.3 million square feet, once home to hundreds of bustling stores and thousands of middle-class dreams, was put up for auction for a laughable $10.5 million in 2013. To put that into perspective, that amount today might only be enough to buy a few luxury apartments in expensive cities. Yet it became the price tag for the death sentence of an American icon. There's a bitter edge to seeing over 90% of the space turn into ghostly corridors years before the first excavators even arrived. Thousands of safety violations were documented, from holes in the roof to a completely disabled fire protection system, a systemic negligence that even the most amateur mechanics would shake their heads at. While millions in tax revenue were lost, the owning corporations seemed fixated on dry figures on balance sheets rather than the soul of a fading community. And then come the promises of modern mixed-use developments, green spaces, and comfortable apartments rising on this land spanning dozens of acres. It all sounds appealing and full of hope, much like how major automakers try to market sleek electric vehicles that lack the powerful roar of the V8 engines our generation once loved. Do they really believe that putting up a few lifeless glass buildings can replace the feeling of squeezing into Sears or JCPenney to pick out a meaningful gift during the holidays? The reality is that when giants like Macy's or Dick's Sporting Goods pull out, they don't just take merchandise off the shelves, they take away a habit and place where you could physically feel product quality instead of sitting at home waiting for a package from Amazon delivered by a stranger. This complete demolition in 2026 seems to mark the end of an era when direct human connection was valued more than a stable internet connection. Just as many small towns across America are gradually losing their identity, the disappearance of Century 3 Mall is a bitter reminder of what we call progress. Many people can't help but feel a sense of regret watching the collapse of what was once a habitual part of life, something that had become a kind of legacy, especially at former icons like Brunswick Square, which officially closed the chapter on its more than half-century journey earlier this year. A massive structure that once served as an economic pillar of Middlesex County is now nothing more than material for nostalgic stories. At Livingston Mall, the situation doesn't seem any better. Legendary department stores like Sears have become hollow shells, and even Cinnabon shops, once known for spreading that signature sweet cinnamon scent so characteristic of American malls, have quietly pulled down their shutters in an eerie silence. The real numbers might give you pause as they paint a harsh reality. Hundreds of locations belonging to national retail chains across New Jersey are expected to continue shutting down throughout 2026. Vacancy rates at mid-tier malls have reached alarming levels, turning many second-floor areas into true dead zones, where the only thing still moving might be LED lights flickering desperately as if waiting to burn out completely. At the same time, tax revenues from these massive commercial properties are declining sharply, leaving budget gaps that, in the end, you and I both understand who will have to bear. Meanwhile, urban planners are once again sketching out promises of urban redevelopment, a familiar illusion of transforming these dozens of acres plots into mixed-use projects combining housing and modern workspaces. It sounds promising, much like how people advertise the convenience of self-driving electric vehicles, yet conveniently forget that we actually enjoy the feeling of being behind the wheel on wide-open roads. Will those polished apartment complexes ever replace the real experience of standing inside a department store, touching the fabric of a Levi's jacket, or trying on a new pair of shoes, instead of staring at them on a phone screen and hoping Amazon doesn't deliver the wrong size? Perhaps we all recognize that this disappearance is not just about numbers on a stock exchange, but the loss of true public spaces, places where people met face to face, instead of interacting through emotionless comment threads on social media. The bulldozers coming next won't just tear down concrete and steel, they seem to be crushing the memories of a generation that believed a weekend stroll through the mall was a symbol of freedom and prosperity. Have you ever wondered why there's such a rush to erase Valley West Mall? It used to be a place where Von Maur didn't just sell you a suit, it sold you confidence, and where JCPenney wasn't just a department store, but part of the American family. But now, as the city of West Des Moines decides to use bulldozers to clean up the past, we're witnessing a painful divorce between the city and the values that built its identity. They call this demolition a mixed-use redevelopment project. It sounds modern and timely, much like how large corporations promote the convenience of online shopping, while ignoring the fact that they're taking away your ability to personally inspect the quality of a durable pair of leather shoes or a Brooks Brothers shirt. The reality is that when major department store brands pull out, they leave behind a void that no polished apartment complex can truly fill. Falling occupancy rates and the now silent corridors at Valley West Mall are likely the result of a shift we're being forced to accept, rather than a choice we willingly made. The promise of a city within a city with luxury apartments and co-working spaces may look beautiful on CAD drawings, but is it really meant for the people who spent their lives building West Des Moines? Or is it just another illusion designed to serve a new class of residents, those who prefer ordering a Starbucks through an app over sitting down to chat with a neighbor in the food court? Since opening in 1960, Golf Mill Shopping Center has not only been one of the largest open-air shopping centers in the world, but also a symbol of prosperity for Niles, Illinois. But now, looking at the plan just announced for fall 2026, you might sense a quiet irony when people describe the demolition of these memories as a kind of surgery for rebirth. It's hard not to give a cynical smile when watching an iconic structure, once a cathedral of traditional retail culture, being prepared for leveling to make way for a modern, live work play complex. They're planning to pour around $440 million into transforming those familiar corridors into a pedestrian-friendly district with about 300 luxury apartments and polished plazas with decorative fountains. It sounds promising, much like how major automakers try to convince you of the superiority of self-driving electric vehicles while forgetting that we truly value the roar of a V8 engine and the feeling of being in control behind the wheel on open roads. Will these new apartment blocks and low-rise office spaces ever replace the real feel of walking into JCPenney to pick out something you like, instead of sitting at home waiting for a package from Amazon to be delivered to your door by a stranger? The reality is that even though big names like Target or the AMC Theater are expected to remain, the soul of Golf Mill, especially its how and the Raid and Raiders, and Wencher Placid has long stood as a landmark of the area, will disappear forever under the blades of excavators. There's a distinct bitterness in knowing that the village of Niles had to approve a financial support agreement of up to $156 million from TIF funds just to save this site from falling into complete abandonment. It makes you wonder whether the values our generation worked so hard to build are now being seen as outdated in the eyes of investors like Sterling Bay. They promise an optimized future, yet it seems they are tearing down the very place that once connected a community in the most authentic way, replacing it with algorithms and dry blueprints on paper. There is a very specific, hollow feeling you get when walking through a mall that used to matter. It isn't exactly sadness, and it isn't quite nostalgia. It's more like standing in a room after the music has stopped, but the disco ball is still spinning. You recognize that these corridors were once buzzing with genuine energy, the echoes of laughter near the fountain, and the frantic rush of holiday shoppers. The physical structures, from the massive skylights at Destiny USA to the high-end marble of Westfield, San Francisco, remain largely the same, but the soul of the machine has been gutted. The truth is, we didn't stop spending money, we just stopped needing the enclosed box to do it. Between the convenience of Amazon, the rise of experiential entertainment, and the shift toward remote work, the traditional regional mall simply became an obsolete vehicle for the modern world. Some managed to pivot into mixed-use hubs or luxury complexes, but the ones on this list were either too buried in debt or too slow to react. They've transitioned from community anchors to cautionary tales and courtroom exhibits. These were real places that held a generation's worth of memories, now reduced to ghost corridors and liquidation spreadsheets. As we watch these giants fall, it makes you wonder about the future of our social spaces. If the mall is no longer the town square, where are we all going to end up? Do you think these massive buildings should be torn down for housing? Or is there a way to save them that we haven't thought of yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on what should happen to these empty landmarks.